Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we'll be taking a look at Skyward Sword HD. Now for those that don't know, Skyward Sword was originally released on the Wii back in November of 2011 for the series' 25th anniversary. Wow, it has been 10 years ago. Holy crap, time just keeps moving on. Anywho, the game back in the day was held up as a fantastic game with a 93% on Metacritic. But does it still hold up today? Remember, this game came out pre-Breath of the Wild, which was a monumental leap for the series. However, you see several concepts seen in Breath of the Wild that were originally introduced in Skyward Sword, like the sailcloth or the stamina meter. With that all in mind, how does Skyward Sword hold up in this new HD release? Let's go ahead and find out. The Zelda Timeline is pretty whack, but essentially there's a split in the timelines after Ocarina of Time, and every Zelda game is set after Ocarina of Time, except for one. Skyward Sword is set before every other Zelda game. Because of this, Skyward Sword is considered very lore heavy, setting up characters and events for future games. The Zelda series as a whole isn't the most story-driven video game franchise, but Skyward Sword does have a pretty interesting story, at least in terms of character interactions. The overall plot is simple, just like the other Zelda games. Save the princess and beat the baddie. Except with Skyward Sword, you have several twists to keep you on your toes, and the characters are some of the best in the series. There's some actual character development here. Each character has a unique charm to them. It's the interactions between characters that make the story what it is. Golden Boy Groose here goes through a great character development, going from bully to an actual hero. I love the scene where the old lady tells him that Link is the hero of prophecy, but that Groose still had a key role in all of it. He really got his act together and became a more likable character. Link and Zelda's interactions are the best in the series by far. They start out as really close friends, and you can feel the connection between them grow throughout the course of the game. The way Link gets emotional seeing Zelda, it still gets me, man. It's incredible. Overall, the story is fascinating for longtime fans, and emotionally investing for newcomers as well. The story is simple, sure, but effective, and it's one of the best in the franchise. The art style is gorgeous and arguably still holds up to this day. The art style doesn't quite age the way Wind Waker does, but it still looks amazing. The game was made with a pastel-looking watercolor style. I would say out of everything the game has to show, the environments are probably the best looking. The character designs range from stellar to downright goofy, and while I would like to see some characters look better, they do fit the art style. Luckily, when they made this port, they didn't hinder the art style and instead improved the resolution and frame rate. The most noticeable difference, however, between the original Wii game and this remaster has got to be the enhanced frame rate. Skyward Sword rocks at a crisp 60 frames per second, and I haven't experienced a lot of dips. In fact, I can't really recall any dips. It's definitely a big step from the original, and a much needed one at that. But overall, Skyward Sword is both smooth and gorgeous. It definitely holds up after all these years later. Like most other 3D Zelda games, Skyward Sword is an adventure game that has you exploring vivid lands and traversing elaborate dungeons. The dungeons in Skyward Sword are among the best that the Zelda series has to offer. They may not all be my favorite, but man, I can't deny the creativity shown in some of these dungeons. Take a look at the ancient Cistern dungeon, for example. It starts off in this bright, pleasant looking dungeon with a giant statue that you can move. It's a pretty calm place with a few enemies, until you reach what is below, and knock knock, welcome to the Underworld. Monster zombies are coming from the ground and the water is poisonous. There's even a part where you have to escape from this hellish nightmare through a piece of rope, and as you're climbing it, these zombies are climbing up the rope trying to get you and pull you down under. It's honestly just so bizarre that I love it. It really sticks in your memory. It's dungeons like this and the sand ship that really show that the Zelda team can really stretch the meaning of the word dungeon to just about anything that you can think of. There's no limit on what you can call a dungeon, and I really like the variety here. The overworld is split into two sections. One is the sky, and the other is the surface. The sky is where Skyloft and every other floating island is. It's a fantastic concept that unfortunately doesn't have the best execution. The sky is straight up barren. There's a few interesting islands here and there, but generally, it's pretty boring. Out of the entire sky realm, there's only one town and a pumpkin saloon. That's kind of lame. Like I said, the concept is great, but outside of a few side quests and collectibles, there's really not much to explore. But what about Skyloft, the only town in the sky? It's actually pretty great. There's a ton of secrets and places to explore on the island. Skyloft is the place that you visit most often, as it has shops and side quests for you to do. The bazaar is full of shops and vendors. It's probably my favorite place in Skyloft because of how essential it is. You have potions, a weapon shop, a scrapper that upgrades your stuff, and even a creepy fortune teller. The bazaar really has it all. There's even a storage place where you can store all of your stuff. My favorite one has got to be the place where you get upgrades for your shields and items. There's just something about getting resources on the surface and bringing them back for a nice upgrade. I just love it. That and your weapons just look slick afterwards, with the added bonus of them actually being improved and being better than before. The next realm you'll be traversing in is the surface, which is split up into 3 sections, each with a different biome for you to explore in an admittedly linear fashion. First is the Farron Woods. Second is the Elden Volcano. Third is the Lanayru Desert. These are separate locations from one another, meaning you can't walk from Farron Woods to the desert or Elden Volcano to Farron Woods, which is kinda weird when you think about it. There are plenty of other Zelda games in the past that have far more connected worlds than this. You can't even fast travel while you're on the surface. You have to shoot up to the sky and then drop back down. This allows you to choose a bird statue below, but you can only do that in that region. Luckily, fast travel isn't a necessity in this game, but the regions on the surface are pretty linear, and because of that, they're not the most fun to explore more than a handful of times. Other than those aspects, the world below the sky is your basic regions that you come to expect in a game like this. I wish there was more of a connection between regions, and maybe add more variety within each region. Some regions add unique ideas that make them stand out, like the ones you see in Lanayru Desert. There's these particular stones called time shift stones that transport the perimeter around the stone back in time, where there's more life and greenery. This concept was later peaked because before striking the stone, there was no way to traverse this sea desert. It was an incredible concept for puzzles, and I thought it was executed nicely. I just love how weird of a concept it is, that you're just in this little area of the past, going through the present time, and seeing the differences between the past of this area and the present. But that's kind of how Skyward Sword is as a whole. There's amazing concepts that are done with flying colors, then there's others that just miss the mark. The world has some creative things going for it, but it all feels disconnected and lifeless. You see unique creatures that have never been in the Zelda series before, ancient beings if you will, but you only see a handful of their kind. It's odd that you never encounter a town of Gorons or a Kikwi village. In older Zelda games, you got to see Zoras in their domain, yet there's only 2 Gorons in this entire game, with no city or town that they come from. That is kind of bizarre to me, but it just goes to show that the world in Skyward Sword is lacking in certain aspects that just leave you a little disappointed. At least it did for me. Normally I would go over combat in this section, but there's a huge elephant in the room that needs to be addressed. The motion controls. Skyward Sword originally came out on the Wii and was built with Wii Motion Plus in mind, so here we are. The Switch, being a hybrid console that supports TV and handheld mode, makes this port a little harder to pull off than it normally would, but Nintendo managed to pull it off. In TV mode, you can use the Joy-Cons like a Wii Remote and Nunchuk. Although it's not as accurate as the Wii Remote, oddly enough, you will have to recalibrate constantly. It's not great, but it's not bad either. It's just a little annoying and something you're gonna have to deal with. Handheld, on the other hand, is an entirely different control scheme. The motion controls are mapped on the joysticks, which in certain segments is actually better than using motion controls. For example, flying your giant bird actually feels better with just your joystick than it would with motion controls. But when it comes to using your sword, yeah, motion controls is the best way to go. Flicking your joystick to swing your sword just doesn't feel the best at times. But for handheld play, it's not bad. Not by a long shot. I think this is the best control scheme that they could have come up with. Overall, I would say motion controls work pretty good for the most part. The joystick's controls are fine, but you do lose something out of the experience. Do I need to say anything about the music? Yes I do. The soundtrack was composed by 5 different composers. One of them, of course, was Koji Kondo, longtime composer for the Zelda series. The music was performed by a live orchestra, which at the time was the first for the series. Another first was the fact that they added vocals to certain tracks, most notably the Ballad of the Goddess song. Honestly, one of the best soundtracks in a Zelda game. I'm so glad they went with a live orchestra for this one, because it really did push the soundtrack to another level. Overall, The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD is the definitive way to play the game. 60 frames per second alone is enough to make it so. There are other improvements like Fi being reduced so she isn't as intrusive, and other minor stuff. However, the game still has some notable issues that kind of bugged me more than when I originally played back in 2011. First of all, did you know that there's a harp in the game? I can't blame you if you actually forgot, because the game doesn't really do anything interesting with this instrument in terms of gameplay. The plot has you thinking that the harp is a big deal, but it's actually not. It feels more tacked on than anything, honestly. In Ocarina of Time, you would use the ocarina constantly, and it made the instrument special because it was integral to the overall gameplay. The harp, on the other hand, does 3 things total. It allows you to progress through the story, summon Sheikah stones, and lets you doodle on the walls. Hey, that's neat. The whole thing just feels tacked on, and that's a shame because I love the sound of the harp. The other thing is the pacing of the game. It's not great. It really drags at the end when you go to the 3 regions on the surface again to do some shenanigans, and it's just padding that isn't necessary. However, the game does excel in character relationships and story development. At the end, you start to care about these characters. And speaking of the end, holy crap, the 2 boss battles at the end are incredible. The fight with Girahim is pretty great, and the fight with his master Demise is epic. It may be simple on paper, and to be fair, it is, but oh man, the music, the setting, everything just works to make for one of the most intense final boss battles out there. Skyward Sword is full of love and passion, but there are some definite shortcomings like the pacing that just can't be overlooked. Overall, I'm going to give Skyward Sword an 8 out of 10. It's not my favorite Zelda game, but it's a pretty good one. If you had to choose between the Wii version and the Switch version, I would easily go with the HD version. Even though the Joy-Cons in TV mode aren't the best in terms of picking up like what you're trying to do, you can easily recalibrate it, don't worry. But it's not as accurate as the Wii Remote, believe it or not. But anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll see y'all next time. God bless.